Hello, my name is James Carter. I'm 31 years old, and I work as a carpenter here in Portland, Oregon. Right now, I'm sitting in the basement of what used to be my childhood home, surrounded by dusty boxes and forgotten memories, waiting for someone who might never come. The wooden steps above me creak occasionally from the weight of footsteps I hope belong to her. Sarah Foster, the woman who changed everything about how I see the world, and maybe, if I'm lucky, how I see myself. She told me she would find me. She said, "I checked every room until I found you down here." Those words echo in my head now as I wait in this dim space that smells like old cardboard and my father's aftershave, wondering if she meant what she said about not giving up on us. The single bulb hanging from the ceiling casts long shadows across tools I haven't touched in months, and I can't help but think about how we got to this moment. Before we see how this ends, tell us where you're watching from and hype this video in the comments. I'd love to know I'm not alone in feeling like sometimes the most important conversations happen in the most unexpected places. It started 3 months ago on a Tuesday morning that felt like any other Tuesday morning. I was installing custom cabinets in a kitchen renovation on the east side of town when my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but something made me answer anyway. The voice on the other end was professional but warm. Sarah Foster from Foster Real Estate. She explained that she represented the buyer who had just purchased my childhood home, and there was a small problem. The previous owners had left some items in the basement, and the new owners wanted them removed before they moved in. Since the items appeared to be personal family belongings, she wondered if I might want to claim them before they were donated or discarded. I hadn't been back to that house since my father's funeral 2 years earlier. After my mother passed when I was 16, it had just been him and me in that 3-bedroom ranch house on Maple Street. When he died, I couldn't bring myself to deal with the estate immediately. I hired a company to handle the sale, took what I thought I needed, and tried to move forward. Apparently, I hadn't been as thorough as I thought. Sarah suggested we meet at the house the following Saturday morning. Her voice had this quality that made me want to keep listening, like she was genuinely interested in making sure these forgotten belongings found their way to someone who would value them. I agreed to meet her there at 10 o'clock. Saturday morning arrived gray and drizzly, typical for Portland in early March. I pulled into the driveway of my old house and sat in my truck for a few minutes, looking at the place where I'd grown up. The new owners had already started making changes. The front door was painted a cheerful yellow instead of the faded green my father had never bothered to refresh. Someone had planted new flowers in the beds my mother used to tend. A silver Honda Accord pulled up behind me, and I watched in my rearview mirror as a woman got out. She was probably in her late 20s, with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and wearing jeans and a navy blue jacket. She moved with purpose, but not hurry, like someone who was comfortable taking her time to do things right. I climbed out of my truck and walked over to meet her. She extended her hand and smiled. "I'm Sarah Foster," she said. "Thank you for coming out here on a Saturday morning." Her handshake was firm, and when she looked at me, she actually looked at me. Not through me or past me the way people sometimes do when they're in a hurry to get through a transaction. Her eyes were brown with little flecks of gold, and there was something about the way she held my gaze that made me feel like she was seeing something in me that I wasn't even sure was there. "James, right?" she said. "I'm sorry for your loss. I know this can't be easy coming back here." I thanked her and followed her up the front walk. She had a key from the listing agent, and we went inside together. The house felt different with all our furniture gone, smaller somehow, but also more open. Our footsteps echoed on the hardwood floors as we made our way through the empty rooms toward the basement door. The basement hadn't changed much. It was still the same paneled rec room my father had finished when I was in middle school, with a small workshop area in the back corner and storage space along one wall. Sarah pointed to 3 cardboard boxes sitting on the old ping-pong table. These were tucked away behind the water heater, she explained. The cleaning crew missed them initially. I opened the first box and immediately recognized my mother's handwriting on a manila folder. Inside were report cards from my elementary school years, art projects I'd made in 2nd grade, and a Mother's Day card I'd forgotten I'd ever made. The second box contained my father's military medals from his service in Vietnam, along with some photographs I'd never seen before. The third box was full of Christmas ornaments, including the felt reindeer I'd made in Cub Scouts and the wooden star my father had carved for the top of our tree. Sarah stood quietly while I looked through everything, not rushing me or making small talk to fill the silence. She seemed to understand that this was more than just retrieving forgotten items. These boxes contained pieces of my family's history that I hadn't even known were missing. I found myself telling her about the reindeer ornament, how proud I'd been when I brought it home from our den meeting, how my mother had made sure it had a place of honor on the tree every year until she died. Sarah listened like the story mattered, like she understood why a grown man might get emotional over a felt ornament with button eyes. When I finished going through the boxes, I looked up to find her watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. It wasn't pity, but it wasn't indifference either. It was something warmer and more complex. "Would you like help carrying these to your truck?" she asked. I accepted her offer, and we made 2 trips to load everything into the bed of my pickup. As I was securing the boxes with a tarp, she asked if I'd like to get coffee somewhere. She said she knew a place nearby that made good Saturday morning pastries. I almost said no. It would have been easy to thank her for her help, shake hands again, and drive away. But something about the way she'd listened to my story about the reindeer, something about how she'd given me space to process finding those forgotten pieces of my past, made me want to spend more time with her. The coffee shop was a local place called Grind Coffee, tucked into a converted house about 6 blocks from my old neighborhood. We found a table by the window and ordered coffee and blueberry scones. Sarah asked me about my work, and I found myself talking more than I usually do with people I've just met. I told her about how I'd started doing carpentry work right after high school, initially just to make money while I figured out what I really wanted to do with my life. But somewhere along the way, I discovered that working with my hands, creating something useful and beautiful from raw materials, felt more meaningful than any career path I'd considered in college. She nodded like she understood. "I went to school for marketing," she said, "but I realized I wanted to do something that helped people through major life transitions. Real estate isn't just about buying and selling houses. It's about helping people move forward in their lives, whether they're starting fresh or honoring what came before." We talked for almost 2 hours. She told me about growing up in a small town in Eastern Oregon, about her decision to move to Portland 5 years earlier, about her love for hiking and her terrible cooking skills. I told her about learning woodworking from my father, about the satisfaction of finishing a project that would last for decades, about my dream of eventually starting my own custom furniture business. When we finally left the coffee shop, I didn't want the conversation to end. I asked if she'd like to see some of my work sometime, and she said yes without hesitation. We exchanged phone numbers, and I drove home with a feeling I hadn't experienced in a long time. Hope, maybe, or possibility. Over the next few weeks, we started seeing each other regularly. Not formal dates exactly, but coffee meetings that turned into long walks, lunch invitations that stretched into afternoon conversations, text messages that became phone calls that lasted until midnight. Sarah had this way of asking questions that made me think about things differently. When I showed her the dining room table I was building for a client, she didn't just admire the craftsmanship. She asked about the wood, where it came from, how I'd chosen this particular grain pattern. She wanted to understand not just what I was making, but why I was making it the way I was. I found myself looking forward to her questions, to the way she listened to my answers like they revealed something important about who I was. She made me feel like my work mattered, like the care I put into each joint and finish was worth something beyond just the paycheck. In return, I started asking her about her work, about the families she helped find new homes, about the sellers she guided through the process of letting go of places that held their memories. She told me about elderly couples downsizing after 40 years in the same house, about young families buying their first home, about divorced parents trying to create fresh starts for their children. "Real estate is really about transitions," she said one evening as we walked through Laurelhurst Park. "People think it's about square footage and granite countertops, but it's really about helping someone move from one chapter of their life to the next." I understood what she meant. Every piece of furniture I built became part of someone's daily life, part of their family's story. The kitchen table where children would do homework and families would share meals. The bedroom dresser that would hold clothes and treasures and love letters. The bookshelf that would display a lifetime of collected stories. We discovered we both loved old movies, especially the ones from the 1940s and 50s, where people talked to each other like conversation was an art form. We started having movie nights at my apartment, making popcorn and watching classics like Casablanca and The Best Years of Our Lives on my laptop. During one of those movie nights, as we sat on my couch watching Jimmy Stewart navigate his post-war life in The Best Years of Our Lives, Sarah asked me something that caught me off guard. "Do you ever think about what your parents would think of the man you have become?" she said. The question hung in the air between us. I'd been thinking about my parents more often since finding those boxes in the basement, but I hadn't expected her to notice. "I think my mother would be proud," I said finally. "She always told me that the most important thing was to find work that felt meaningful, not just work that paid well. And my father, he taught me that anything worth doing was worth doing right. I try to honor that in everything I build." Sarah nodded. "They sound like good people." "They were," I said, "imperfect, like everyone, but good." She reached over and took my hand. "I'm glad you found those boxes," she said. "I'm glad you called me back." That was the moment I realized I was falling in love with her. Not just attracted to her or enjoying her company, but genuinely, deeply falling in love. It was the way she understood that finding those forgotten pieces of my family's history had been important. The way she recognized that some things matter more than their practical value. But falling in love with Sarah also made me aware of how different our worlds were. She had a college degree and a professional career. She owned her own condo in a nice part of town and drove a reliable car that she'd bought new. She wore clothes that looked like they came from actual stores rather than thrift shops and clearance racks. I lived in a one-bedroom apartment above an auto repair shop, drove a 15-year-old pickup truck with rust spots and a temperamental heater, and most of my clothes were work shirts with sawdust permanently embedded in the fabric. I was good at what I did, but what I did was work with my hands for hourly wages. These differences might not have mattered if Sarah had been a different kind of person, but she was smart and ambitious and had plans for her future that probably didn't include a carpenter who was still trying to figure out how to save enough money to start his own business. I started noticing things I hadn't paid attention to before. The way she would pause before answering when her friends asked what I did for work. The way she would change the subject when conversations turned to weekend trips or expensive restaurants. The way she seemed surprised when I mentioned that I was saving up for tools rather than planning a vacation. It wasn't that she was unkind or deliberately exclusive. She just lived in a world where people assumed certain things about income and lifestyle and future plans. A world where 31-year-old men were expected to have retirement accounts and 5-year plans and opinions about wine. The issue came to a head about 6 weeks after we'd started seeing each other. Sarah's company was having their annual spring party, and she invited me to come with her. It was being held at a country club in Lake Oswego, and she mentioned that most of her colleagues would be there with their spouses and partners. I wanted to say yes. I wanted to be the kind of man who could accompany her to work functions without feeling like I was wearing a costume. But the thought of making small talk with real estate agents and loan officers and property developers made my stomach tighten. What would I talk about with these people? How would I explain that I was 31 years old and still renting an apartment, still driving a truck that required a specific sequence of key turns and pedal pumps to start reliably? How would I fit into conversations about market trends and investment properties and vacation homes? I told Sarah I had a work commitment that weekend. It wasn't technically a lie. I did have a project deadline coming up, and I could use the weekend to catch up. But it wasn't the whole truth either. She accepted my excuse without question, but I could see something shift in her expression. A small disappointment maybe, or a recognition that I was pulling back from something she'd wanted to share with me. The weekend of her company party, I worked in my shop until late Saturday night, sanding and staining cabinet doors until my hands were raw and my eyes burned from the fumes. I kept thinking about Sarah at the country club, wearing the black dress she'd bought for the occasion, laughing with her colleagues, explaining my absence with some polite fiction about my work schedule. Sunday morning she called to tell me about the party. She kept her tone light and casual, but I could hear something underneath it. A question maybe about why I hadn't wanted to be there with her. That afternoon, we met for coffee at our usual place. Sarah seemed different somehow, more careful with her words, like she was trying to solve a puzzle she couldn't quite see clearly. "James," she said finally, "is everything okay between us?" The question was simple, but I didn't have a simple answer. Everything was okay, and nothing was okay. I was happier with her than I'd been with anyone in my life, but I was also more aware of my limitations than I'd ever been before. I'm not sure I'm the right person for you, I said. She frowned. What do you mean? I mean, you deserve someone who can be a real partner in your life, someone who fits into your world. Sarah set down her coffee cup and looked at me directly. What world is that exactly? I gestured vaguely, trying to find words for something I couldn't quite articulate. Your career world, your educated, professional, successful world. I'm a carpenter, Sarah. I work with my hands for hourly wages. I don't have a college degree or a retirement plan or opinions about wine. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Is that what you think matters to me?" "I don't know what matters to you," I said. "That's the problem." "What matters to me," she said slowly, "is that you listen when I talk about my work like it's important. What matters to me is that you remember things I tell you and ask follow-up questions weeks later. What matters to me is that you make beautiful things with your hands and take pride in doing them right." "But," I started to say, she held up her hand. "What matters to me is that you found those boxes in your parents' basement, and instead of just throwing them away, you took the time to go through them and remember the people who loved you. What matters to me is that you told me about that felt reindeer like it was the most precious thing in the world, because to you it was." I wanted to believe her, but I also knew that feelings could change when reality set in. When the novelty of dating someone different wore off, when the practical considerations of building a life together became unavoidable. We left the coffee shop that day without really resolving anything. Over the next few weeks, we continued seeing each other, but there was a new tension between us. Not anger or resentment, but a kind of careful distance, like we were both waiting for the other person to decide what came next. I threw myself into work, taking on extra projects and staying late in my shop. I told myself I was being practical, building up my savings account, preparing for the day when I might be ready to start my own business. But really, I was avoiding the conversation I knew we needed to have about our future. Sarah seemed to be doing her own version of the same thing. She mentioned new listings and difficult clients and continuing education courses she was taking to advance her career. We were both staying busy, both moving forward in our separate lives, both pretending that the distance growing between us was temporary rather than deliberate. The turning point came on a Thursday evening in late April. I was working late in my shop, trying to finish a custom entertainment center for a client who wanted it delivered the following week. The piece was more complex than anything I'd attempted before, with hidden cable management and adjustable shelving, and a hand-rubbed finish that required multiple coats applied days apart. I was applying the final coat of polyurethane when my phone rang. Sarah's name appeared on the screen, and I almost didn't answer. We'd been playing phone tag for 3 days, leaving voicemails about maybe getting together over the weekend, maybe catching a movie, maybe grabbing dinner if our schedules worked out. But something made me set down my brush and pick up the phone. "James," she said, and I could hear something different in her voice. Something urgent. "What's wrong?" I asked. "I need to see you," she said. "Can you meet me somewhere?" I looked around my shop at the half-finished projects and the tools scattered across my workbench. The entertainment center still needed 4 more hours of drying time before I could move it, and I had an early morning appointment with the client. "I'm working," I said. "Can it wait until tomorrow?" There was a pause. Then she said, "I got a job offer today. In Seattle. A really good offer." The words hit me like cold water. Seattle was 3 hours away. A different city, a different state, a different life. "That's great," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Congratulations." "James," she said, "I haven't accepted it yet." "Why not?" I asked. "You know why not." But I didn't know, or I was afraid to assume I knew. I was afraid to believe that I might be important enough to factor into a decision about her career, her future, her life. "I need to see you," she said again. "Tonight." I looked around my shop one more time, at the work that would still be there tomorrow, at the safe and predictable routine that had become my refuge from the uncertainty of everything else. "Where?" I asked. "Your parents' house," she said. "I'll meet you there." The request was so unexpected that I didn't immediately respond. "Why there?" I finally asked. "Because that's where this started," she said. "That's where I first saw who you really are." I agreed to meet her there in an hour. After I hung up, I cleaned my brushes and covered the entertainment center with a drop cloth, moving through the familiar motions while my mind raced through possibilities. Was she saying goodbye? Was she asking me to come with her? Was she hoping I would give her a reason to stay? The drive to my parents' house felt longer than usual. The new owners had continued making changes. They'd painted the shutters and replaced the front porch light and planted a small garden where my mother's rose bushes used to grow. It looked like a home where people were building a future rather than preserving a past. Sarah's Honda was already in the driveway when I arrived. She was sitting on the front steps, and she stood up when she saw my truck. She was wearing jeans and a sweater, and her hair was loose around her shoulders. She looked beautiful and determined all at the same time. "Hi," she said. "Hi," I said back. We stood there for a moment looking at each other across the distance of the front yard. Then Sarah said, "I have something to tell you, and I have something to ask you." "Okay," I said. "The job offer is real," she said. "It's with a boutique firm that specializes in historic properties. It's exactly the kind of work, I've always wanted to do, and it pays almost twice what I'm making here." I nodded, waiting for her to continue. "But before I make any decisions, I need to know something," she said. "I need to know if you think we have a future together." The question hung between us like a challenge. It was the conversation we'd been avoiding for weeks, the one that would require both of us to be honest about what we wanted and what we were willing to risk to get it. "I don't know," I said finally. "I want us to have a future, but I don't know how to make that work." "What do you mean?" she asked. "I mean, you're going places in your career, and I'm still trying to figure out how to afford my own shop space. I mean, you deserve someone who can keep up with you, someone who can be an equal partner in building the life you want." Sarah walked closer to me, close enough that I could see the gold flecks in her brown eyes. "James," she said, "what do you think I want?" "I don't know," I admitted. "I want someone who sees me," she said, "really sees me. Not just the professional version or the polished version, but all of me. I want someone who cares about doing good work, even when no one's watching. I want someone who understands that the most important things aren't always the most expensive things." She paused, then continued. "I want someone who can find a felt reindeer in a dusty box and remember the story of the little boy who made it for his mother. I want someone who builds beautiful things because he believes the world deserves more beauty." "But what about the practical stuff?" I asked. "What about the fact that I can't afford to take you on vacations or buy you nice jewelry or contribute equally to a mortgage on a house in a good neighborhood?" She smiled, but it was a sad smile. "Do you think that's what love is, James? Do you think that's what partnership means?" "I don't know what love means," I said. "I thought I did, but being with you has made me realize how much I don't understand about building a life with someone else." Sarah reached out and took my hand. "Love means caring more about someone else's happiness than your own comfort zone," she said. "It means believing that what you bring to the relationship has value, even if it's not the same thing the other person brings." "What do I bring?" I asked. "You bring kindness," she said. "You bring integrity. You bring the ability to create something beautiful from raw materials. You bring a way of seeing the world that makes me want to slow down and pay attention to things I've been rushing past my whole life." I wanted to believe her, but I also knew that feelings weren't always enough to bridge practical differences. "What about Seattle?" I asked. "That's what I need to ask you," she said. "I need to know if you would consider coming with me. Not because I can't go alone, but because I don't want to." The possibility had never occurred to me. I'd been so focused on the ways I didn't fit into her world that I hadn't considered the possibility of us creating a new world together. "What would I do in Seattle?" I asked. "The same thing you do here," she said. "Build beautiful things. The only difference would be that you'd be building them in a city where I also happen to live and work." "It sounds simple when you put it that way," I said. "Some things are simple," she said. "Not easy necessarily, but simple." We talked for another hour, sitting on the front steps of my childhood home as the sun set behind the trees in the backyard. Sarah told me about the job offer in detail, about the firm's reputation and the types of projects they worked on, and the opportunities for advancement. I told her about my fears, about feeling like I was asking her to settle for less than she deserved, about not knowing how to be the kind of partner she needed. She listened to all of it without trying to fix or dismiss my concerns. Then she said, "James, I'm not asking you to become someone different. I'm asking you to trust that who you are right now is enough. When we finally stood up to leave, Sarah said, "I need to give them an answer by Monday." "That's 3 days. What are you going to tell them?" I asked. "That depends," she said. "Are you willing to take a chance on us?" I didn't answer right away. I needed time to think, to process everything she'd said, to figure out if I was brave enough to believe that love might be simpler than I'd been making it. "I'll call you tomorrow," I said. She nodded and walked toward her car. Then she stopped and turned back. "James," she said, "whatever you decide, I want you to know that meeting you changed something for me. You made me remember that the best things in life aren't the ones you plan for. They're the ones you discover when you're brave enough to look in unexpected places." She drove away, and I stood in the driveway for a long time, looking at the house where I'd grown up, thinking about the boxes we'd found in the basement and the conversation that had started everything between us. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about what Sarah had said about love being simple, about taking chance, about creating something new together rather than trying to fit into existing expectations. I also thought about my parents, about the life they'd built together in that house. My father had been a mechanic, my mother a part-time bookkeeper for a local dentist. They'd never had much money, but they'd had something else. They'd had partnership. They'd had shared purpose. They'd had love that was based on seeing and valuing who the other person really was. Friday morning, I called in sick to work and drove to the coast. I needed space to think, away from the familiar routines and obligations that usually filled my days. I found a diner in Cannon Beach and sat by the window, drinking coffee and watching the waves, while I tried to imagine what my life might look like in Seattle. The practical concerns were real but not insurmountable. I could find work as a carpenter anywhere. I might even find better opportunities in a larger city, more clients who appreciated custom work, more chance to build the kind of reputation that could eventually support my own business. The emotional concerns were more complex. Moving to Seattle would mean leaving behind everything familiar, everything safe. It would mean trusting that what Sarah and I had together was strong enough to survive the stress of major life changes. But staying in Portland would mean something else. It would mean choosing fear over possibility, choosing the safety of the known over the adventure of the unknown. I thought about the felt reindeer in that box, about the little boy who had made it with such pride and hope. I thought about my parents who had built a life together based on love and shared values rather than matching bank accounts or social status. Most of all, I thought about Sarah, about the way she listened when I talked about my work, about the way she asked questions that made me think more deeply about what I was creating and why. By Friday evening, I knew what I wanted to do, but knowing and doing are different things, and I spent Saturday morning pacing around my apartment, rehearsing what I wanted to say, trying to find the courage to make the call. Finally, Saturday afternoon, I called Sarah. "I've been thinking about what you said," I told her. "And," she said, "and I think you're right about some things being simple," I said. "I love you, Sarah. I want to build a life with you, wherever that happens to be." There was silence on the other end of the line. Then I heard her take a shaky breath. "Are you sure?" she asked. "I'm terrified," I said, "but I'm sure." We made plans to meet Sunday morning to talk about the details, about timing and logistics, and all the practical considerations that would need to be worked out. But first, Sarah said, there was something she wanted to show me. Sunday morning, I met Sarah at my parents' house again. She was waiting in the driveway with a key in her hand. "I got permission from the new owners to go inside," she said. "There's something I want you to see." We went through the front door to get there, our footsteps echoing in the empty rooms just like they had 3 months earlier. But instead of heading toward the basement, Sarah led me upstairs to what used to be my childhood bedroom. The room was empty except for a small wooden box sitting in the middle of the floor. "I found this yesterday when I came by to ask the owners about borrowing the key," Sarah said. "It was tucked behind the radiator in your old room." I opened the box and found a collection of things I'd forgotten I'd ever owned. A baseball signed by a minor league player who had visited my elementary school. A pocket knife my grandfather had given me for my 12th birthday. A letter from my mother, written the week before she died, telling me how proud she was of the young man I was becoming. I sat on the floor and read the letter while Sarah waited quietly beside me. My mother had written about her hopes for my future, about her belief that I would find work that mattered to me, about her confidence that I would build a life filled with love and purpose. She had also written about my father, about how he'd taught her that the most important thing in any relationship was seeing and appreciating who the other person really was, flaws and strengths together. When I finished reading, I looked up at Sarah. "How did you know this was here?" I asked. "I didn't," she said. "I came by yesterday to return something I'd borrowed from the listing agent, and the new owner mentioned that they'd found another box while they were painting this room. When they told me where it was hidden, I had a feeling it might be important. I folded the letter carefully and put it back in the box with the other treasures." "Thank you," I said. Sarah smiled. "I figured if we're going to start a new adventure together, you should have all the pieces of your story with you." We spent the rest of that Sunday making plans. Sarah would accept the job offer in Seattle and start in 6 weeks. I would give notice at my current job and use the time to finish my existing projects and research opportunities in Seattle. We would look for an apartment together, something with space for a small workshop where I could continue building furniture while I established myself in a new city. It wasn't going to be easy. There would be challenges we couldn't anticipate, adjustments we couldn't plan for, moments when we would question whether we'd made the right decision. But as we sat in my empty childhood bedroom, surrounded by the echoes of my past and the possibilities of our future, I felt something I hadn't experienced in a long time. I felt ready for whatever came next. The next few weeks passed quickly. I finished the entertainment center for my client, completed 2 other projects that were in progress, and started researching woodworking suppliers and potential workshop spaces in Seattle. Sarah worked with her new employer to finalize her start date and began the process of selling her condo. We spent our evenings together, sometimes planning for the move, sometimes just enjoying our remaining time in Portland. We went to movies and took walks and had dinner at the restaurants we'd discovered together over the past few months. One evening, as we were walking through Laurelhurst Park, Sarah asked me if I was nervous about leaving Portland. "Yes," I said, "but I'm more excited than nervous." "What are you most excited about?" she asked. I thought about it for a moment. "I'm excited about seeing what we can build together," I said. "Not just a relationship, but a whole life. I'm excited about finding out what's possible when the 2 people decide to take a chance on each other." Sarah smiled and took my hand. "I'm excited about that too," she said. 3 weeks before we were scheduled to move, Sarah's company threw her a going-away party at the same country club where I declined to accompany her months earlier. This time, when she invited me, I said yes without hesitation. The party was exactly what I'd expected. Well-dressed professionals making small talk about market trends and interest rates and vacation plans. But this time, instead of feeling like an outsider looking in, I felt like Sarah's partner. When people asked what I did for work, I told them I was a carpenter, and when they asked follow-up questions, I answered with confidence rather than defensiveness. Sarah introduced me to her colleagues not as her boyfriend or her date, but as her partner. She talked about our move to Seattle like it was an adventure we were embarking on together, and when people wished us luck, I could see that they meant it. During the drive home from the party, Sarah said, "That was different from what I expected." "How so?" I asked. "I thought I would be sad about leaving," she said, "but mostly I just felt ready to start the next chapter." I knew what she meant. Portland had been home for both of us, but it was starting to feel like a place we were moving away from rather than a place we belonged. Our last week in Portland was a whirlwind of packing and paperwork and goodbye dinners with friends. I sold most of my furniture and tools, keeping only the pieces that were too meaningful to replace or too essential for starting fresh. The night before we left, we drove out to my parents' house one more time. The new owners had installed landscape lighting, and the house looked warm and welcoming in the evening glow. We sat in my truck in the driveway, not talking, just looking at the place where our story had begun. "Thank you," I said finally. "For what?" Sarah asked. "For seeing something in me that I wasn't sure was there," I said. "For believing that what we have together is worth taking a chance on." She reached over and took my hand. "Thank you for being brave enough to take that chance," she said. The drive to Seattle took 4 hours, our 2 cars loaded with everything we owned, following the interstate north through familiar Oregon landscape and into the unknown territory of our new life together. We'd found an apartment in the Fremont neighborhood, a 2-bedroom place with hardwood floors and big windows in a basement space that the landlord said I could use as a workshop as long as I didn't disturb the neighbors. It wasn't fancy, but it felt like home the moment we walked through the door together. Sarah started her new job the following Monday, and I spent my first week in Seattle exploring the city, visiting lumber yards and hardware stores, getting a feel for the local market for custom woodworking. By the end of the week, I'd lined up 3 potential clients and found a supplier who could provide the quality materials I needed for my work. Our first month in Seattle was an adjustment period. Sarah was learning her new job and meeting her colleagues while I was establishing my business and building a client base. Some evenings we were both too tired to do much more than order takeout and watch movies on my laptop. But gradually we found our rhythm. We discovered a farmer's market on Saturday mornings where we could buy fresh produce and locally made bread. We found a coffee shop within walking distance of our apartment where the baristas started to recognize our usual orders. We learned which bus routes connected Sarah's office to my workshop space, and we figured out how to coordinate our schedules so we could have dinner together most nights. 3 months after moving to Seattle, I got my first major commission. A couple who had seen some of my work through a mutual friend wanted me to build a complete dining room set for their new house. It was the kind of project I'd been dreaming about for years, the chance to create something that would be the centerpiece of a family's home for decades. I spent weeks planning the design, selecting the wood, perfecting the joinery techniques. Sarah would come down to the basement workshop some evenings to see my progress, asking questions about the grain patterns and the finish options, listening as I explained the challenges and solutions I was working through. One evening, as I was applying the final coat of finish to the dining table, Sarah sat on my workbench and watched me work. "You're different here," she said. "Different how?" I asked. "More confident," she said. "Like you know exactly who you are and what you're supposed to be doing." I set down my brush and looked at her. "I feel different," I said. "I feel like I'm building something that matters. Not just the furniture, but this whole life we're creating together." Sarah smiled. "I feel that way too," she said. Like everything I did before was practice for this. 6 months after moving to Seattle, Sarah was promoted to senior associate at her firm. The promotion came with a significant raise and the opportunity to lead her own projects. She was assigned to oversee the restoration of a historic mansion that was being converted into luxury condominiums, exactly the kind of work she'd moved to Seattle to pursue. Around the same time, I was approached by an interior designer who wanted to collaborate on a series of custom pieces for high-end residential projects. It was the kind of partnership that could establish my reputation in Seattle and provide steady work for years to come. We celebrated both milestones with dinner at a restaurant overlooking Elliott Bay, toasting our success and our decision to take a chance on building a life together in a new city. But the real celebration came later that evening, as we walked home through the neighborhood we'd come to love. Sarah stopped suddenly in front of a house with a for sale sign in the front yard. "What do you think?" she said. "About what?" I asked. "About buying a house," she said. "About putting down roots here." I looked at the house, a 1920s craftsman with a front porch and mature trees and what looked like a detached garage that could be converted into a proper workshop. "I think it's a good idea," I said. "I think it's time." We made an offer on the house the following week. It was accepted 3 days later. The house needed work, which was perfect for someone who made his living fixing and building things. The kitchen needed updating, the bathroom needed renovation, and the garage needed to be converted into a workshop. But the bones of the house were solid, and I could see the potential for something beautiful. Sarah and I spent our weekends visiting home improvement stores and planning renovation projects. She had opinions about paint colors and cabinet hardware, and I had ideas about built-in storage and custom millwork. We discovered that we worked well together as a team, that our different strengths and perspectives complemented each other. The garage conversion became my first major project in our new house. I insulated the walls, installed proper lighting and ventilation, and built custom storage for all my tools and materials. When it was finished, I had a workshop that was better equipped than any space I'd ever worked in before. Sarah suggested we have a workshop warming party, inviting our new friends and neighbors to see the space and celebrate this milestone in our Seattle life. I was nervous about showing off my work to people I didn't know well, but Sarah convinced me that it was important to share what we were building together. The party was a success. Our neighbors were impressed by the workshop and interested in my furniture. I ended up with 3 new commissions just from conversations at the party. But the best part of the evening came after everyone had gone home. Sarah and I stood in the workshop, surrounded by the tools and materials of my trade, in the house we'd bought together, in the city where we'd decided to build our future. "I can't believe this is our life," Sarah said. What do you mean? I asked. I mean, a year ago, I was living alone in a condo, working at a job that was fine but not exciting, wondering if I would ever find someone who really understood me, she said. And now I'm here, with you, in this house, building something that feels bigger than either of us could have created alone. I pulled her close and kissed her forehead. I know what you mean, I said. Sometimes I look around and think about how different everything could have been if you hadn't called me about those boxes in the basement. A year and a half after moving to Seattle, Sarah and I were sitting in our living room on a Sunday morning, drinking coffee and reading the newspaper, when she looked up at me with an expression I'd learned to recognize. It was the same expression she'd had when she'd asked me to move to Seattle with her. The same look that meant she was about to suggest something that would change our lives in a significant way. James, she said, I have something I want to talk to you about. Okay, I said, setting down the sports section. I've been thinking about marriage, she said. The words hung in the air between us. We talked about our future together in general terms, about the house and our careers and the life we were building, but we'd never explicitly discussed marriage. What about marriage? I asked. I want to marry you, she said. Not because I think we need a piece of paper to validate what we have, but because I want to make a public commitment to building this life together. I looked at her, sitting cross-legged on our couch in her pajamas, her hair messy from sleep, holding her coffee cup with both hands. She was beautiful and brave and everything I'd never known I was looking for. I want to marry you too, I said. Really, she asked. Really, I said. I've wanted to marry you for months, but I wasn't sure if you felt the same way. She laughed. We're both terrible at this, aren't we? We've been living together for over a year, buying a house together, planning our future together, but we were both too nervous to talk about marriage. I guess we're better at doing things than talking about doing things, I said. Sarah set down her coffee cup and moved closer to me on the couch. So what do we do now? She asked. Now we plan a wedding, I said. What kind of wedding do you want? She asked. I thought about it for a moment. I want something simple, I said. Something that feels like us. Maybe in the backyard with our friends and family, with food that we actually like instead of fancy catering. Sarah smiled. That sounds perfect, she said. We spent the rest of that Sunday morning planning our wedding, making lists of people to invite, and discussing whether we wanted to hire a band or just create a playlist. It was the kind of conversation that felt both momentous and completely natural, like we were simply acknowledging something that had already been true for a long time. 6 months later, we were married in the backyard of our house on a sunny Saturday in September. Sarah wore a simple white dress that she'd found at a vintage shop, and I wore a suit that I'd had tailored to actually fit properly. Our families came from Oregon, and our friends from both Portland and Seattle filled the folding chairs we'd rented for the occasion. I'd built an arbor for the ceremony using wood from a maple tree that had been removed from our neighbor's yard. Sarah had woven flowers through the latticework, creating something that was both beautiful and meaningful, a symbol of what we'd learned about building something together from individual contributions. The ceremony was officiated by Sarah's college roommate, who had gotten ordained online specifically for our wedding. She spoke about love being a choice that you make every day, about partnership being the decision to see the best in someone even when they're not at their best, about marriage being the commitment to keep choosing each other through all the changes that life would bring. During the reception, my father-in-law pulled me aside. I was nervous about what he might want to say. Sarah's parents had been polite, but somewhat reserved when they first met me, clearly unsure about their daughter's decision to move across the country with a carpenter she'd known for less than a year. James, he said, I owe you an apology. For what? I asked. For assuming that you weren't good enough for Sarah, he said. For thinking that love was about matching resumes rather than matching hearts. He paused, then continued. But watching the two of you together, seeing how happy she is, seeing the life you've built together, I realized I was wrong. You're exactly the right person for her, and she's exactly the right person for you. Thank you, I said. That means a lot to me. He shook my hand. Welcome to the family, James. As the evening wound down and our guests began to leave, Sarah and I found ourselves alone in our backyard, surrounded by the remnants of our wedding celebration. The lights we'd strung through the trees cast a warm glow over the empty chairs and the table where our cake had been. How do you feel, Mrs. Carter? I asked. Sarah laughed. I feel like the luckiest person in the world, Mr. Carter. she said. How about you? I feel like we just made a promise that I'm excited to spend the rest of my life keeping, I said. We spent the next hour cleaning up, collecting plates and glasses and folding chairs, working together to restore our backyard to its normal state. It was domestic and ordinary and perfect, a preview of all the ordinary moments we would share as husband and wife. That night, as we lay in bed in our house that we owned together, married to each other, I thought about the journey that had brought us to this moment. From that first phone call about forgotten boxes in a basement, to coffee shop conversations that lasted for hours, to the decision to take a chance on love in a new city, to this moment when we were officially committed to building a life together. 2 years after our wedding, Sarah was offered a partnership in her firm. It was an opportunity that would make her one of the youngest partners in the company's history, with the chance to lead major projects and eventually open a branch office in another city. At the same time, my furniture business had grown to the point where I was turning down work because I couldn't keep up with demand. I'd been approached by a gallery owner who wanted to represent my pieces, and I'd been invited to participate in a craft fair that could introduce my work to collectors from around the country. We were both succeeding beyond our original expectations, but success brought new choices and new challenges. The partnership offer would require Sarah to travel more frequently and work longer hours, at least initially. The gallery representation would require me to produce more pieces and maintain consistent quality and delivery schedules. We spent several evenings discussing what these opportunities would mean for our marriage, for our plans to start a family, for the balance we'd worked hard to maintain between our professional ambitions and our personal life. In the end, we decided that we were both ready for the next level of professional challenge, but only if we could pursue it together. Sarah negotiated a partnership agreement that would allow her to maintain some control over her schedule, and I hired an apprentice to help me increase production without sacrificing quality. 3 years after our wedding, Sarah came home from work with news that would change our lives in a way we'd been hoping for but hadn't quite expected yet. I'm pregnant, she said, standing in the doorway of my workshop where I was putting the finishing touches on a rocking chair for a client. I set down my sandpaper and looked at her, trying to process what she just said. Really, I asked. Really, she said, smiling. I walked over and pulled her into my arms, holding her close and feeling a joy that was bigger than anything I'd experienced before. We'd been trying to get pregnant for 6 months, and while we knew it might take time, we'd both been starting to worry that it might not happen at all. How are you feeling? I asked. Excited, she said. Scared. Happy. All of it at once. Me too, I said. Over the next few months, we prepared for parenthood with the same careful planning we'd brought to every other major decision in our marriage. We converted the spare bedroom into a nursery, painting the walls a soft yellow, and building a crib and changing table and bookshelf that would hold all the stories we planned to read to our child. Sarah continued working until 2 weeks before her due date, managing projects and training her replacement for her maternity leave. I adjusted my workshop schedule to be more flexible, knowing that once the baby arrived, my priorities would need to shift. Our daughter was born on a Tuesday morning in March, after 12 hours of labor that tested both Sarah's strength and my ability to be helpful, rather than just worried. When the doctor placed Emma Rose Carter in my arms for the first time, I understood something about love that I'd never comprehended before. It wasn't just that I loved this tiny person immediately and completely. It was that loving her made me love Sarah even more, made me grateful for the woman who had brought this perfect little being into our lives. The first few months of parenthood were exhausting and wonderful, and harder than anything we had ever done together. Emma was a good baby, but she was still a baby, which meant that our sleep was interrupted, our schedules were unpredictable, and our conversations were often limited to discussions about feeding schedules and diaper changes. But even in the midst of the chaos, I could see that we were good at this. Sarah was a natural mother, intuitive and patient and endlessly loving. And I discovered that I enjoyed the practical aspects of caring for a baby, the problem solving and the routine and the simple pleasure of making someone I loved feel safe and comfortable. When Emma was 6 months old, Sarah returned to work part-time, and we hired a babysitter to help during the hours when we were both working. It was an adjustment for all of us, but we found a rhythm that allowed us to maintain our careers while being present for our daughter. One evening when Emma was almost a year old, I was working in my shop while Sarah gave her a bath upstairs. I could hear them laughing together, Sarah making silly voices, and Emma giggling in response. I stopped what I was doing and just listened, thinking about how full my life had become. 5 years earlier, I'd been living alone in an apartment above an auto repair shop, working for hourly wages and wondering if I would ever find someone who understood me. Now I was married to my best friend, living in a house we owned together, running a successful business, and raising a daughter who brought joy to every day. It wasn't that our life was perfect. We still had challenges and disagreements and moments when we were both too tired to be our best selves. But we had something that felt solid and real and worth protecting. That night, after Emma was asleep and we were sitting on our couch, Sarah said something that captured what I'd been feeling. "Do you ever think about that day we met at your parents' house?" she asked. "All the time," I said. "I was so nervous," she said. "I'd never done anything like that before, calling someone about forgotten belongings. But something about your voice on the phone made me think you were someone worth meeting. I'm glad you trusted that instinct," I said. "Me too," she said. "I think about all the things that had to happen for us to find each other. You had to decide to answer the phone that day. I had to be brave enough to suggest coffee. You had to be willing to take a chance on moving to Seattle. And you had to be patient enough to wait for me to figure out that what we had was worth taking a chance on," I said. Sarah smiled and took my hand. "I would have waited," she said, "however long it took. Now sitting here in this basement again, surrounded by the memories of my childhood and the uncertainty of what comes next, I think about that conversation. I think about all the chances we've taken together, all the times we've chosen to trust each other and trust our love over our fears." The footsteps upstairs have stopped. The house is quiet except for the sound of my own breathing and the distant hum of the furnace. I check my phone and see that it's almost 9 o'clock. Sarah said she would be here by 9. I hear the front door open. Footsteps cross the living room, then the kitchen. I hear her voice calling my name. "James," she says, "are you here?" "I'm down here," I call back. The basement door opens and I hear her coming down the stairs. She appears at the bottom of the steps, still wearing her work clothes, looking tired but determined. "I checked every room until I found you down here," she says. These are the words I've been waiting to hear, the words that tell me she meant what she said about not giving up on us, about being willing to work through whatever problems we're facing. "Hi," I say. "Hi," she says back. We look at each other across the basement where our story began, where we first discovered those boxes full of forgotten memories, where we first started to understand that some things are worth preserving and some chances are worth taking. "I'm sorry," I say. "I'm sorry for shutting down, for pulling away, for making you feel like you had to chase me down here to have this conversation." Sarah walks over and sits beside me on the old couch. "I'm sorry too," she says. "I'm sorry for putting so much pressure on us and make a decision about the job offer. I'm sorry for not giving you more time to process everything." We sit in silence for a moment, both of us looking around at the basement that holds so many memories. "So," she says finally, "what do we do now?" "Now we figure it out together," I say. "Like we always do. The job offer is still on the table," she says, "but only if you want it to be. Only if you think it's the right thing for our family." "I've been thinking about it," I say, "about what it would mean to move again, to start over in another new place." "And," she asks, "and I think the most important thing isn't where we live," I say. "It's that we're together. It's that we keep choosing each other, keep building this life we've created." Sarah takes my hand. "So what does that mean?" she asks. "It means if you want to take the job in San Francisco, we'll make it work," I say. "It means if you want to stay here, we'll make that work too. It means I trust us enough to handle whatever comes next." She smiles and I see relief in her expression. "I was so afraid you were going to say you couldn't do it again," she says, "that you were tired of following me around the country." "I'm not following you around the country," I say. "I'm building a life with my wife. There's a difference." Sarah leans against me and I put my arm around her. We sit together in the basement where we first met, surrounded by the echoes of our past and the possibilities of our future. "What do you think Emma will say about moving to San Francisco?" Sarah asks. "I think she'll be excited about the adventure," I say. "She's at the age where everything is an adventure." "And what about your business?" she asks. "I'll figure it out," I say. "I always do." We talk for another hour, making plans and discussing logistics and working through all the practical considerations that come with another major life change. But underneath all the details, there's something more important happening. We're remembering how to be partners, how to face challenges together instead of separately. When we finally get up to leave, Sarah stops at the bottom of the stairs and looks back at the basement. Thank you, she says. For what, I ask. For being here, she says, for being willing to have this conversation. For still believing in us. I always believe in us, I say. Even when I'm scared or confused or don't know what comes next, I always believe in us. We turn off the lights and head upstairs together, leaving the basement behind, but carrying with us everything we've learned about love and partnership and the courage it takes to keep choosing each other through all of life's changes. Outside, the evening air is cool and fresh. We walk to our cars hand in hand, ready to go home to our daughter and our life and whatever comes next. I know there will be more challenges ahead, more decisions to make, more moments when we'll need to remember that love is a choice we make every day. But I also know that we're good at this, Sarah and I. We're good at building something beautiful together, whether it's a piece of furniture or a marriage or a life that's bigger than either of us could have created alone. As I follow Sarah's car out of the driveway of my childhood home, I think about all the unexpected places love can find us, all the chances we get to say yes to something bigger than our fears. I think about felt reindeer in forgotten boxes and the woman who saw something in me that I wasn't sure was there. And I think about tomorrow and all the tomorrows after that and the life we'll keep building together, one choice at a time.